The era of revenge is rising in China, not as a slogan, but as a widening chain of cracks spreading across a surface the authorities have long tried to repaint with two familiar coats: violence and silence. For years, the propaganda machine constructed an image of absolute stability: officials above the law, police as the coercive arm, courts as the place where justice gets stamped and sealed. But when life is pushed to the point where there is no way back, what remains is not faith in the legal system, but the feeling of being insulted, dispossessed, and suffocated, and if that feeling lasts long enough, it turns into anger with a target. On the surface, explosions, attacks, and retaliatory acts appear as isolated incidents. Yet underneath, they are connected by a chilling social logic. When channels for pleading are shut, when petitions vanish into a black hole, when evidence is ignored, when trials become political theater, justice is no longer something people seek, it is something they stop believing exists. And a society that no longer believes in justice will begin inventing other ways to be heard, even if the price is horrific for everyone. What makes this picture especially tense is that it isn't confined to one group. It spreads from small merchants who get picked as targets, from businesses forced to pay all kinds of unnamed fees, from residents whose homes are forcibly demolished, to workers trapped in a prolonged downturn. Under a governance model that prioritizes regime survival, resolving grievances often loses to maintaining stability. The result is a toxic loop: the harder the state squeezes, the more society suffocates; the more society suffocates, the more extreme the reactions; the more extreme the reactions, the more justification the state claims to squeeze even harder. And so the pressure cooker climbs. No agitator needed, only daily life continuing to be ground down. In recent days, people have talked constantly about explosions and large-scale accidents sinking into an informational fog. The frightening part is not only that events happen, but how they disappear from public space at abnormal speed. In a normal society, a major traffic disaster would trigger continuous reporting: casualties, causes, responsibility, remedies. But in a system obsessed with stability, the story can be cut off as if it never existed. Posts are deleted. People who filmed are pressured. State media falls into total silence. That silence, instead of killing rumors, feeds them into something larger. People stop asking, "What happened?" and start asking, "Why are they hiding it so hard?" At the same time, incidents rooted in conflict between citizens and local management take a different form. They resemble a final accusation, written in the extreme action of someone driven to the edge. A business owner, before dying, leaves allegations aimed directly at specific individuals and departments, from local cadres and urban management forces to those accused of colluding in a network of extortion and abuse. The message spreads not because people love drama, but because too many recognize themselves in it. They, too, have been asked for under-the-table payments, subjected to endless inspections, punished under a logic of, if they want to fine you, they'll find a reason, and forced to swallow humiliation just to survive. And here is the alarming point: as the economy weakens and local governments lose revenue, the hunger for money tends to slide downward, from big enterprises to mid-sized firms, then to small businesses, and finally to individuals on the road. When life is already fragile, the finance fee system operates like a machine: targets, pressure, quotas. In countless online accounts, truck drivers, people who live on each load, become the most frequently squeezed. Being pulled over no longer feels like routine enforcement, it feels like a blow to the family's rice bowl. A fine can equal days, even weeks of labor. And when freight supply is excessive, rates are forced down, orders shrink, and trucks sit idle for long periods. One sudden fine can turn an entire month into disaster. That is why confrontations between drivers and traffic enforcement have grown increasingly tense. Videos show panicked drivers trying to escape, people being stopped in a state of despair, and cases that end in deadly outcomes. This must be said plainly: taking another person's life is a crime and cannot be justified. But what makes society shudder is the crowd reaction. Rather than only condemning the perpetrator, many express sympathy for the mindset of being driven until you explode. That sympathy is not an endorsement of violence, it is recognition of the mechanism that produces violence, turning people into mobile ATMs, turning the law into a revenue club, turning workers into targets who must bow just to keep moving. When fiscal numbers are published, the picture becomes sharper. Non-tax revenue rises. Fines, confiscations, and enforcement. Penalties become a significant part of local government wallets. If an apparatus is assigned revenue targets, it will automatically optimize to collect, no personal malice required. Only the structure. And when that structure is imposed on a society in decline, it creates a crushing effect. The poorer you are, the more you get fined, the more you get fined, the poorer you become, the poorer you become, the more trapped you are. Trapped long enough, people develop the mindset of nothing left to lose. That, more than anything, is what frightens the authorities, because it cuts the most important leash of all, fear of loss. But if we only look at street confrontations, we still miss the second layer of crisis, the spiritual collapse of youth. A society can endure poverty for a time, but it struggles to endure a generation drained of vitality. When images surface of students at a top university walking with exhaustion, blank faces, synchronized steps like an unconscious march, viewers are shocked not because it looks bad, but because it reflects a truth: even those selected through brutal filters are burning out. They don't lack ability. They lack hope. From childhood, kids are stuffed with test pressure, cram classes, endless homework. By university, anxiety about jobs sits on their shoulders before they even grow up. After graduation, they enter a shrinking labor market where a degree is no longer a guarantee, where stability becomes a privilege of connections, where people send hundreds, sometimes 1,000, applications and never receive a call. In that context, slogans like upskill, entrepreneurship, or stimulate consumption sound like encouragement in a room running out of oxygen. Everyone knows it's theoretically correct, yet no one sees a real exit. That trapped feeling is magnified by a paradox: the state insists GDP still rises, targets are met, yet everyday life grows visibly poorer. Income shrinks. Spending tightens. People don't dare shop, don't dare have children, don't dare plan long-term. As the gap widens between numbers on paper and life on the street, trust erodes not because of rumors but because of daily experience. And when economic trust collapses, political trust follows. If they can beautify statistics, they can beautify everything. In an environment where speaking directly is dangerous, society invents indirect language, metaphor, jokes, satire. Recently, raising pigs allegories spread precisely because they say what many feel but cannot state openly: a system training obedience, rewarding the good, using the good to control the bad, exploiting everyone while constantly invoking welfare. The allegory shocks. Not because it is literary, but because it is brutally simple. Everyone knows which position they occupy in the pen, who holds the feed bucket, who holds the whip. Notably, public reactions to such satirical videos seem to change over time. There was a period when people scolded truth-tellers as troublemakers. But as crisis drags on and more people experience injustice firsthand, sarcasm begins to transform into quiet consensus: fewer insults, more saves, more shares. That is the most dangerous kind of awakening for a control system. No protests needed, no slogans required, just more people recognizing the mechanism, calling it by name, and withdrawing belief from the official story. If we assemble all the pieces, covered-up incidents, small business tragedies under extortion, road confrontations fueled by machine-like fines, youth exhaustion, the mismatch between GDP claims and lived reality, and the spread of satirical allegory, we get a single unified picture. This is not only an economic crisis, but a legitimacy crisis. When a state prioritizes regime survival over concrete justice for citizens, it can buy time with repression. But it cannot buy back trust once trust has been burned. And because it cannot admit these cracks, the familiar response remains censorship and denial. Yet denial backfires, it tells society they know, but they won't fix it. It turns each personal story into a collective symbol. A forced demolition is no longer one family's pain, but shared memory of helplessness. An absurd fine is no longer a ticket, but the feeling of being robbed in the name of law. An unemployed graduate is no longer not trying hard enough, but a question mark over an entire generation's future. No one can be certain what happens next in a pressure cooker like this. It could be released through real reform, more transparency, less abuse of power, genuine legal channels, protection of livelihoods, and the return of minimal fairness. But if the choice remains, hide it for stability, seal it so it doesn't spread, strike hard so people fear, then social rules are cold and consistent. Fear can maintain order, but it cannot create durable stability. Durable stability exists only when people believe they can live without being hunted, do business without being squeezed dry, seek justice without disappearing, and dream without being treated as guilty. The most frightening thing is not a handful of shocking cases, but their normalization, one incident today, another tomorrow, until society grows numb and only one question smolders: if everything is still growing, if everything is still stable, why do people live as if they are running? When that question spreads widely enough, it stops being economic. It becomes an indictment of how a system treats human beings. And that is the real meaning of the revenge era people talk about. Not a call for violence, not the glorification of retaliation, but a sign that too many have passed the stage of hope, passed the stage of endurance, and are now standing at the final stage of a society with its exits locked. If the door of law does not open, the door of media does not open, the door of dialogue does not open, society will open another door, and historically, that door rarely leads anywhere good. If there is one message to take from all these fragments, it is simple and brutal: stability cannot be built on fear. A country cannot be managed like a pen. People can remain silent for a long time, but no one can be stripped of dignity forever without reaction. When dignity is ground into dust, what remains is not obedience, but despair. And despair, when it meets a mechanism of abuse and a contracting economy, turns into something even an apparatus of repression struggles to control: an anger that no longer believes promises, only believes in ending helplessness with its own hands. But to understand why that anger can become targeted anger, you have to look deeper into the layered experience of dispossession, year by year, incident by incident, in small humiliations outsiders often dismiss. Some wounds are not in the money taken, but in the way people are treated as if they have no right to explanation, no right to fairness, no right to argue. When a small shopkeeper is summoned again and again, subtly threatened that without cooperation, inspections will never stop, licenses will be suspended, power and water cut, supply chains blocked, when a business owner is dragged into donation drives that are essentially coerced, when a family is forced out with absurd compensation but cannot win in court because the court has already chosen its side, these experiences accumulate into a kind of collective memory. It doesn't vanish when people fall silent. It settles, smolders, and waits for a moment to ignite. In that context, censorship is no longer a technical measure. It becomes a political signal. It tells society, you don't need to know. And once people absorb that contempt, they stop seeing censorship as maintaining order, and start seeing it as stripping the right to be human. That is what makes resentment most durable. People can forgive mistakes, but they struggle to forgive humiliation. When news disappears not once but countless times, when ordinary questions can be labeled disturbing order, when a field video is wiped within hours, society reaches its own conclusion: if there were nothing to hide, they wouldn't need to hide it. Speculation becomes survival, and suspicion becomes reflex. Another factor that heats the pressure cooker is the rupture between expectation and reality for the middle class. For years, they were promised that if they worked hard, bought a home, raised well-educated children, and accumulated step by step, a safe future would follow. But when property markets drop, jobs become unstable, incomes fall while living costs do not, and the safest asset turns into a debt burden, the shock is not just economic. It is a shock of faith. People realize what they were trained to believe no longer holds. And when the class most invested in stability begins to despair, society loses a crucial stabilizing force. Because that middle layer, when it trusts the system, is often the layer willing to endure, to tolerate, to say, "Don't make it big." When even they start to lose hope, the psychological wall preventing society from sliding into extremes becomes dangerously thin. From a social psychology perspective, this is a hazardous stage. Anger shifts from personal anger to identity-level anger. People no longer resent only one police officer, one cadre, one regulator. They begin to resent the system that produces them. And once anger attaches to the system, it easily finds symbols, offices, compounds, official residences, figures seen as embodiments of power. Then retaliatory acts, even if committed by a minority, carry an outsized social effect. Because they strike the sense that someone finally did what we cannot. That contagion effect is dangerous not because everyone will imitate it, but because it changes the atmosphere. It makes resistance imaginable. Meanwhile, youth exhaustion produces another kind of dead end, one that does not erupt as an explosion, but as withdrawal from life. A society where young people no longer want to try, no longer want children, no longer want homes, no longer want to believe, is a society losing its internal engine. No revolution is required, the erosion of motivation alone can hollow out the economic and social base over time. But withdrawal is not always stable. When young people are forced to compete, bow, endure, and be judged, day after day, withdrawal can flip into explosive reaction when triggered by a public injustice, a privilege scandal, a contemptuous remark, an oppressive policy. Not because they are hot-headed, but because they have been empty for too long. That is why the revenge era is not merely about blasts. It is the sign of a society beginning to lose faith in peaceful correction mechanisms. When people believe change is possible through speech, they speak. When they believe they can win through law, they sue. When they believe honest work can secure a decent life, they work. But when all three beliefs are eroded at once, society gets pushed toward two poles: total submission or extreme reaction. The tragedy is that both poles destroy the future. Total submission kills vitality and creativity. Extreme reaction shatters safety and order. If the system refuses to open a middle path, justice and transparency, society will swing harder between those poles. Finally, the most frightening feature of this phase is the quiet question that begins to live in countless minds: what if I'm next? Once that question takes root, people live defensively. They won't invest. They won't expand businesses. They won't trust. They won't speak. A society living defensively becomes a society of suspicion and fear, while also containing another kind of eruption, the eruption of those who can no longer endure. The paradox is brutal: the more the system tries to maintain stability by forcing silence, the more it accumulates unpredictable energy. So if we had to describe the essence of this picture, it is not simply more violence. It is a society entering a stage where normal, peaceful ways of resolving injustice are made useless. When justice is no longer a place to go, it becomes something people try to create themselves, one way or another. And when justice is privatized through despair, the consequences rarely fall only on the intended targets. They spread across society. That is why explosions, revenge attacks, and extreme acts should not be treated as sensational stories. They are signals, a warning that the paint of stability is peeling. And when enough paint peels away, what is exposed underneath is not strength, but a country battling the very conditions it has created.